Hello, everyone. My laptop just informed me that recording is in progress, so I think that's us going. So, welcome to the future of beauty. I'm so excited for this webinar today. We'll be talking about how the beauty industry is affected by AI, TikTok, and baby Botox, as promised. We'll also be talking about much more, a little bit more about media, injectables, and loads and loads of things. Just as a bit of like a content notice. So, if there's any kind of difficult content in this, we are going to be talking about Ozempic from an injectable point of view, but not as a weight loss drug, as about Ozempic face, you'll see later. We'll also be talking about gendered beauty standards and a few descriptions of certain injectables that I've tried to keep as ungory as possible, I promise, but some of them are a little bit gory. But yes, please do submit any questions throughout. We're really happy to answer those at the end rather than throughout, if that's okay. And feel free to pop in the chat as well. I probably won't be able to see it until we do the Q&A, just as a warning, because I'm also operating the PowerPoint. So yeah, I think, how about we dive in with our introductions? So Sonika, would you like to go first and just, yeah, tell us a bit about yourself and why you're here today?
Hi, lovely to be here, and thank you, Pulsar and Sal, for inviting me. My name's Sonika. I'm a strategist based in London. I primarily work in the fashion and beauty space, helping brands navigate the ever-changing world of social media and digital tech. I'm also ex-TikTok, which is obviously very relevant to this conversation. I was there for 3 years working on global content partnerships and also working very closely with beauty publishers, beauty brands, and beauty creators, helping those partners to find success on the TikTok platform. So yeah, excited to have this conversation and amazing insights coming your way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really excited. And Zoe, nice to meet you. Hello. We've obviously already met, but hello.
Hi. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I am Zoe Liu. So I'm a cultural strategist and researcher, which means that my work is basically about kind of helping brands to navigate cultural change. And I tend to do that across business challenges like positioning, comms, creative, design, innovation are the main sorts of things I work across. My background is very much in insight and research. So I've been kind of consulting independently with brands and agencies for about the past 1.5 years. And before that, I was co-leading cultural strategy at the insight agency Firefish. So yeah, that's the kind of lens that I'll be bringing to the discussion today.
Thank you so much. I just got a pop-up that I've been logged out, but can you still all hear me? Brilliant. That's wonderful. And I'm not, as it says in the bottom of my name is not Pulsar. My name is Sal Morton. I'm the content marketing lead here at Pulsar. And yeah, I've put together some of the research that we're looking at today, and we'll be presenting some of my colleagues' research as well. So very excited. Thank you, Sonika and Zoe. And let's dive in. Before I dive in, let's kind of talk a little bit about what Pulsar is, because I don't think everyone that's attended might know who we are. So all of the data that you'll see in front of you today is from Pulsar. Don't worry, I'm not just going to read this slide from here at any point. So we gather data from all across the web and more. So any public signal that's being put out, we pick up. So that's X, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit, as well as Google search, online news, forums, blogs, podcasts, TV, radio. I'll run out of breath if I keep trying to say that all in one go. But we kind of realized the impossible task of reading the internet. So this allows brands and companies to analyze their audience, its sub-audiences, as well as answer discrete audience-based questions. We offer all of that in our platform. We also have an in-house research agency that acts as a kind of consultancy as well. So that's a little bit about Pulsar. Please do ask any questions if you have any throughout the presentation. All right, so let's move on to our first topic, which is injectables. So what we're looking at here is a visual representation of how different injectable related hashtags interact on TikTok. So hashtags act as like signals clustering around key themes, they're a great indication of how conversations interact with each other. So we can see here that we've got a huge amount of conversation around non-surgical transformation. So this is filler, Botox, all kinds of laser transformations and injections that are kind of put in the pursuit of youthful skin or kind of smooth skin generally. So understanding how these patterns work together kind of reveals how aesthetic treatments are being discussed and adapted on TikTok. So some like Botox and filler all sit at the heart of that conversation in that big blue bit on the right. Others such as PRP, med spa, and specific brands such as Sculpture and Profilo sit kind of outside that conversation, which is really interesting. This kind of tells us what people are not only kind of searching for, but also what they're creating, and how these treatments are positioned socially as well. So yeah, it's interesting to look at their novelty relative to other products as well. So we can see Profilo and Sculpture here kind of stand outside the main non-surgical transformations bulk. So Sculpture is a particular type of filler, and Profilo is a very unique injectable that uses hyaluronic acid to treat signs of wrinkles and aging and all things like this. And then the laser and PRP hair treatments is interesting to stand outside of the main bulk as well, because this is kind of hair care, scalp care. But yeah, I think what I'll do is I think kind of ask Zoe and Sonika, do you have anything that you want to kind of say at the beginning here about these kind of injectable trends that we're seeing in general before we go into some more specifics?
I love that we've just started straight on the injectables, like no warm up, just straight into it. I love it. But yeah, I was going to say, like, obviously from a TikTok perspective, what we see here is also reflective of what the platform does and doesn't allow. So as part of the community guidelines on the platform, you cannot directly talk about cosmetic surgery. So what we're also seeing is, like with lots of other things on social media, people create their own language when it comes to different treatments, and that language is ever evolving to get around the community guidelines on these platforms. So I think that's also related to, I think, what we're going to talk about on the next slide. But yeah, Zoe, I think you're about to say something as well.
Yeah, I guess just my sort of observations on this first slide is, as you've pointed out, Sal, yeah, fillers and Botox, those sort of non-surgical transformations really take up the bulk. But for me, it's really interesting to see things like Sculpture, Profilo, PRP begin to kind of emerge out of that big clump already, which for me really kind of point towards what the kind of future direction of the landscape is going to look like, where, you know, apart from being alternatives to fillers, as you said, Sal, these are also what's being called kind of biostimulators. So injectables that actually more use kind of what is already in the body. So for example, kind of stimulating your body's growth of collagen, PRP, creating a serum from your own blood and taking out the growth factors there. So, you know, a kind of future of injectables that is less kind of noticeable. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this kind of dazed headline that we're entering the era of undetectable beauty, but I think it's also interesting to think about that in terms of what's aspirational here, what people are kind of seeking, in terms of a more kind of unnoticeable look, a more natural look, which of course has implications for kind of beauty standards, what we see as realistic versus non-realistic, what kind of goes hidden under the radar and becomes much easier to kind of be dishonest about, which is a lot of what we already see in celebrity culture today. And, you know, what that means for everyday kind of girls and women trying to navigate this space for themselves.
Absolutely. I think it's so interesting what you said about the kind of nature of hidden beauty being such a rising trend, especially when we go on to talk, I mean, spoiler alert for later,
Yeah.
about how AI is interacting with beauty standards and the beauty industry in general. So maybe I'll save that for later because I know it may be more pertinent then. But I think as well, your point about it being a very kind of scientific conversation. I mean, someone in the chat picked up on that saying, Katie has said that there's a lot of noise for polynucleotides at the moment. And PRP is another similar, quite science-based procedure. But when we look at behavior-related hashtags, we can see that we get a kind of a different type of language. So before we kind of dive into here, I'm just going to kind of shortly kind of dwell on what we're looking at. So this is all behavior-related hashtags. This is nothing like hashtag Botox is taken out of here, hashtag filler is taken out of here. This is just very kind of specific behavior-related hashtags around injectables. So we can see that vampire facial is the biggest here in terms of behavior. Now, the reason that I put this in behavior is because of the language being used. I mean, Sonika, I think when we were speaking before, you were talking about the word vampire and the word facial and how kind of interesting it is to see here as opposed to PRP.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the whole branding of some of these treatments is interesting, and then breaking that down into what has the consumer almost branded it for themselves, and then what is actually being marketed by the industry. I think it is worth saying, like, it's obviously so dangerous when a cosmetic procedure is reduced to a hashtag that sounds really cute and sounds really throwaway, but it is still a medical procedure. However, I do think from like a creator and content perspective, there are some really good creators who are dermatologists, who are professionals, putting some education back into the space and advising people where necessary. But yeah, super interesting.
It is really interesting, and I think as well, I mean, I didn't explain what vampire PRP is, but it's taking the esthetician will take the blood out of the body, spin it around super fast, and then the platelets go into the plasma of the blood. They get separated, and then that plasma is injected, platelet-rich plasma is injected back into the face or whichever area. Sometimes it's the scalp. It sounds a bit science fiction, but it is medically sound, and it's used in other medical ways as well for burns and things like that, sometimes by doctors. I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into baby Botox later, but I think let's have a little think about this language. So all across here, I'm seeing colloquial language being put in. I think vampire facial, as we touched on, it's got that kind of like element of fun, but it's also got that kind of element of danger and risk and excitement to it. The same thing as calling Botox tox in trap tox, and trap tox is something that's used to not for visual reasons, but for kind of like posture and for relaxing the muscles in the neck, as well as like pain and other things like that. Barbie Botox is in there as well. And then we move on to baby Botox, which is something that I'm so excited to talk about because it's such an interesting phenomenon. So baby Botox does not refer to giving Botox to a baby. It actually refers to giving Botox to people in their early 20s generally. This is preventative Botox injections that immobilize the face, so prevent wrinkles rather than kind of cure them. This made me think of my friend's niece is in primary school, and for Christmas she asked for skincare. And when we were speaking before, we were talking about in preparation for this webinar, we were talking about how skincare and youthfulness and that beauty stuff keeps being brought kind of earlier and earlier into women and girls' lives. So, Zoe, you spoke about how youthful branding is a big part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's no coincidence that brands like Bioma and Drunk Elephant are the ones that are doing really well with that kind of tween, teenage cohort, because they are like super bright and poppy and fun. And that has kind of unintentionally brought in this teenage audience. What's really interesting, I think, is we now have brands like Bubble. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, that is actually now releasing skincare for girls aged, around 14, that sort of age, so that they can get into skincare, but in a way that is kind of age appropriate and without kind of all the trappings of sort of adult female skincare that we all know and love, and all of the unrealistic standards and the pressure and all of that comes with it. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity for brands, because there is a kind of less sinister way to look at this, in that, I remember kind of playing dress up as a kid and the sort of like weird peel off nail varnishes for young girls that you get. So it feels like there is a way to do this that preserves like the fun and the play. And, it is the kind of pressure and the standards that we want to get away from. It's not the thing itself that's the issue. But of course, there's a need to tread carefully, because another example is Ulta that released a bunch of their kind of products like NYX and like those sorts of brands, a bunch of their products in kind of toy form. So that was not received too well by parents because obviously that, you know, was kind of directly taking all of the kind of adultness of makeup and giving it directly to children. So yeah, there's kind of opportunity, but a need to tread carefully.
Very interesting, because I think protection of children is a huge thing that comes into, as we'll kind of see later, we'll maybe touch on later in the AI beauty section as well, because of the kind of use of filters and uh, banning filters for under 16s, that kind of thing. But we'll come on to that later. Yeah, I think it's really interesting you saying as well, Bioma has just won a really big marketing award for its use of kind of creative packaging, and it does work really well. It stands out on a shelf, and we did a webinar about skincare about a year ago, specifically skincare, and these products are designed to look good and be fun to play with. And you're right, they kind of do stimulate like a toy like thing. I remember my mum used to use this wrinkle cream when I was a kid, and it was this kind of austere pot of like with a grey lid, and it was a kind of very serious thing, like anti-aging. Like we know those brands like Estee Lauder, things like that are very serious. But now we're into the baby Botox. I thought let's move on to the baby Botox backlash, which is very fun to say out loud. Yeah, so I think let's have a little chat about why there's this backlash. And obviously a lot of the content creators here in this space are women, and talking about, I mean, I really like this one on the left. It makes me want to throw my phone at the wall. Yeah, what are our thoughts on this backlash that we see here?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely no surprise that baby Botox is getting this sort of backlash. And these are already great examples. I also love that it makes me want to throw my phone at the wall. And I think that's a really great encapsulation of how frustrated people are growing with, I guess, the trend cycle and almost kind of treating our bodies as, you know, a trend thing. And of course, that kind of mashup of capitalism plus beauty standards really kind of reaches ahead when it comes to injectables, because these are things that have permanent impacts, permanent effects on the body, but you're using it in a trend-led way, you know, something like Barbie Botox. And, you know, like Sonika was saying, that sort of like hashtaggy approach to language that we see. So yeah, I'm not surprised by this, but I think what's really interesting is what's underlying all of this response and the continued frustration that we still see towards kind of unrealistic beauty standards and things like that. Even in 2025, we're still here. And, you know, I really think there's an interesting place for brands to have a voice in kind of narratives of aging, to really kind of finally do away with these pressures for women to retain eternal youth. You know, we've had these kind of big cultural moments recently that kind of feels like change is coming, you know, Pamela Anderson. We've had older women actresses getting much more visibility than before. The substance obviously huge. But at the same time, I think because all of these beliefs and that kind of cultural desire and preference for youthfulness amongst women is so strong, these two things are kind of pulling us in opposite directions. And I can also understand that brands are probably in a similar place, or it sort of reflects probably how brands are thinking about this, in that, yes, we know that there's a more positive direction that we can be going in, but let's be real, anti-aging sells, like women are still reaching for it on the shelves. That is the kind of risk with playing in more emergent culture. You know, the payoff is not going to be immediate, but I guess the idea is that once the culture does catch up to where you are, you're going to be the one that everyone is kind of wanting to catch up with. So, I mean, I personally, you know, would love to see brands you know, thinking more about what feminine joy and self-expression really look like and mean to women in middle age? And, you know, what does confidence and empowerment really feel like in that bracket and at that life stage? And I do think that there are two really key kind of social shifts that indicate that you know, this will become important. And the first one I would call out is this rise of kind of dinks, like double income, no kids, and also the associated kind of delaying or, you know, not having kids at all. You know, that middle-aged life stage is about to look very different for a good portion of people. And the second one is simply the silver economy, in that, you know, younger people don't have any money. So, you know, it's really going to be that kind of older age bracket that brands are going to be looking at. So, yeah, I think more kind of, you know, fresher, more dynamic, more energized kind of representations of aging that, you know, really kind of question why we valorize youth so much. That's something that I think brands should be paying attention to.
That's really interesting. I think it makes the conversation kind of, it situates the baby Botox conversation within the wider world of kind of skincare sales, isn't it? It's not just about baby Botox. Baby Botox is reflective of this trend towards youthfulness that's happening. Sonika, do you have any thoughts on that, and what kind of the I mean, we'll come into maybe the brand AI lens later, brand from an AI lens later, but brand from a youthful point of view.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Zoe that brands have a responsibility, and the kind of product to cosmetic and injectables pipeline are so interconnected and overlapping. In terms of like the beauty standards conversation, I feel like when it comes to the baby Botox backlash, that is probably a very small conversation in terms of people saying, you know, we're going to go back to real. Like, I think we're post going back to real. The new standard, I think, is approaching cosmetics and injectables whilst being informed and thinking long term, and thinking about the broader beauty standard conversation and what that means to you. So I think, yeah, as a brand, it's not thinking about, oh, but how can we be against cosmetic injectables and support like real beauty? It's more about getting into the mindset of what a consumer is really thinking these days, which is they are probably considering cosmetics and injectables in a big way, and really kind of, yeah, thinking about that conversation in a much more nuanced way, because it is incredibly complex and nuanced.
It really is. It's very, that's something that I found when doing this research, is that there's not really one particular narrative that stands out. And we'll be looking a bit more at the concept of narratives in the AI section later. I just wanted to really quickly move through this slide in looking at which non-video sharing platforms, because we obviously spoke a lot about TikTok and baby Botox, but how's the conversation looking on non-video sharing platforms? So as we can see here, I'm counting TV as a non-video sharing platform because it's not like short form. The conversation is predominantly, it's very dominated by X here, but we see a lot of broadcast and some podcasts as well. On Reddit, we get a lot of topics that are maybe more fringe topics. So maybe an example that I've used here is Botox for men, baby Botox for men, sorry. And on X, we see quite a lot of memes about baby Botox. We see a huge amount of people also just talking about the baby Botox they've had, like just calling it, like, it's very cutesy, like baby Botox. Here's Kyron Thrax, the winner of Drag Race UK last year, and saying, look, I've not had anything done, only baby Botox. So it's showing that it's a cutesy, it's a non-invasive treatment, it's just a entry-level cosmetic procedure. So I thought that was quite interesting to share. Before we move on to the next section, which is the section talking about Ozempic face, I also just wanted to say, remember to pop in your questions in the question box as we go along. I've seen some questions come up in the chat as well. Don't worry, I will be sharing those, answering those as we go on. Let's move on to Ozempic. So the reason that we're talking about Ozempic is because when I was examining the injectable beauty trends, Ozempic face was interestingly present. So obviously this is a conflation of a product that's made for health, diabetes treatment, and then turns into a weight loss prescription drug over time, and then is being therefore brought into conversations around beauty standards. So it's interesting to see how far it's come as a topic, along with the kind of shame and backlash that the users of it face. So we're going to examine Ozempic not as an injectable from a beauty standpoint, but as an injectable from a beauty standpoint, but not because of its use as a weight loss drug, because of its conflations with other things such as beauty standards, skincare, facial care, and other behaviors as well. We can see this chart here that kind of looks at a few backlashy things about Ozempic. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about beauty's increasing relationship with morality. So I think, I don't know, I'll open it up, but yeah, how about beauty and morality?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, I think when we talked about this, we noticed how Ozempic cheats, the kind of orange bit, was really kind of starting to take over towards the end of the year. Am I right? Am I reading this?
Yes, yeah, no. So I guess to look at what we're seeing is we're seeing that in the first half of the year, a lot of conversation is concentrated around Ozempic face, which is when is a derogatory term used for people who take Ozempic and then their face shape changes into and it's a negative connotation. But then that turns away from body shaming into a conversation around cheating weight loss, or cheating beauty, or cheating fitting in, or whatever this conversation brings in. It grows a lot in the latter half. But yeah, sorry, it's the links with morality there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that it's interesting to see another kind of age-old story crop up here in the guise of something that feels quite new in Ozempic. But yeah, this idea that as a woman, you need to always look beautiful, but you can't try too hard. You can't be unnatural because that makes you fake. And the way that, all of that is kind of tied up in morality and the content of your character and all of that feels uniquely kind of gendered. But yeah, as I say, it really feels like an kind of old wine in new bottles here.
It's really interesting, isn't it, about like kind of a pressure to be a certain way, and then a pressure to not appear fake as well. And it's kind of interesting how people using Ozempic for whichever use case are facing different kinds of backlashes. So in blue here, being told, it's got side effects, you'll get you'll get illness from it, it will make your skin look terrible, it will make your heart fail, then into kind of shaming that behavior as well, kind of saying, oh well, you've had access to this, but you're actually cheating. I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it also online, I've seen it kind of get caught up in sort of conversations around like inequality as well, and that sort of you're not ugly, you're poor sort of thing. So there's that sort of narrative of unfairness and privilege and inequality as well. But yeah, I think reflecting on kind of what a brand might take from this or find interesting, I think for me it's interesting that, after what feels like years of, empowerment and like brands kind of speaking to kind of progressive values, especially in the beauty space. And, if you look at the media today, you would think that woke culture has taken over. But really this kind of shows me that, there's actually still more that brands can be doing to be communicating around those sorts of emotions and desires and aspirations for greater empowerment and confidence for women. But maybe it's time, we need to do that in kind of fresher ways, and ways that are kind of more attuned to what's going on today, and possibly more nuanced and not just sort of like purely positive.
Definitely. Sorry, I didn't know if you're going to jump in there, Sonika.
I do have a point, but it's kind of going back to this graph, but maybe
No,
that
please
kind
do.
I was just going to say it's interesting when I'm looking at this that the blue section of Ozempic side effects feels like a conversation that someone is having in relation to themselves, and maybe searching for information on side effects or having a discussion. Whereas the other two layers maybe feel like it's people that are targeting celebrities or influencers who are on Ozempic. So they feel like two different conversations happening to me. And the one, I bet you, the one in red and purple is men targeting, you know, female celebrities, and the blue is, you know, women searching for themselves. So it's just interesting to start to think about these dynamics that are happening online in different spaces.
That's really interesting, and someone in the chat has said that they're echoing this point and saying that they've observed backlash around Ozempic usage as well, about people who are using it for medical needs, like diabetes and stuff like that, as opposed to people using it for weight loss and stocks being taken up as well. So I think that that would maybe go into your point of maybe backlash around in that blue section, Sonika, rather than kind of toxicity towards female celebrities. And obviously I think it's quite an age-old trope to punch up, especially on social media. These search results come from X, Reddit, forums, Tumblr, blogs, as well as some radio podcasts and TV as well. So it's quite text-based mediums, this. So this is places where people are going to vent. This is places where people are going to specifically maybe at someone or reply underneath saying, you know, well, you've got Ozempic face, or something like that, and kind of using it as a way to bat away potentially insecurities they hold within themselves. I think it's interesting, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this right at the end of the AI beauty stuff, but about body positivity seeming to have waned, and that era. I think, do you want to touch on that shortly before we go into AI, talking about AI and beauty? Yeah, the kind of waning body positive movement that we're potentially seeing.
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a little bit. Like, well, to my point earlier, I feel like the body positivity conversation is still there, but it's not what is good isn't real necessarily. Like, we need to be more inclusive of, you know, beauty comes in lots of different ways, including those that decide to have treatments, cosmetics, injectables. Like, it's all about empowering women to do what feels good for them, rather than like black and white, right and wrongs. So I do think there are brands out there that maybe need to update their thinking when it comes to that, and just think about what their messaging looks like for the future consumer. And to our previous conversation, the future consumer of Gen Alpha, whether we like it or not, is potentially being conditioned to be leading more into skincare and beauty products at a younger age. So I just think like really having that messaging of like, it's your skin, it's your body, it's your decision, is really like what the core of the beauty positivity messaging should be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Zoe, again, you're unmuted, so I didn't want to jump on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is really kind of what you're asking, but what you were saying Sonika, kind of sparked thought in something I've been seeing recently, which is, yeah, I've kind of seen kind of where we are with the conversation, I guess, around empowerment is definitely, I guess I've seen it kind of called choice feminism, where it's sort of like, it's my choice, I've made this decision, therefore power to me. You know, we're already kind of starting to see, and I think this is a real illustration of kind of how quickly culture can move around these things. We're seeing actually people kind of start to pull apart the difference between personal empowerment versus social empowerment. So, you know, what's empowerment for you or me as an individual versus is it actually empowering for us women as a whole? And I think this is what makes this whole conversation around injectables really, really tricky and knotty and difficult to pull apart, is that, you know, yes, on the one hand, you know, you can go and get your filler, your skin boosters, whatever, and that is your choice. And that is personal empowerment, personal freedom to make that choice. But at the same time, when that choice kind of still upholds patriarchal values of beauty, or doesn't do anything necessarily to dismantle them, then can we really call that empowerment kind of as a blanket term? So yeah, another example of how there's a need for kind of nuance here, and things are, as ever, becoming more and more complex.
I think that brings us very well into our next section, which is AI and beauty. Thank you so much, Zoe and Sonika. Before we dive into the AI and beauty section, I wanted to shout out that this next section of the webinar is going to be taking an exclusive look at a brand new report released just today by the brilliant Di, Nikita, and Gina on our team. So please, if you have any interest in any of the slides that are coming up, which you definitely will, please keep an eye on your inbox, because the full report is going to come there straight afterwards. Yeah, we're going to send it to you. There's plenty more insights in there as well that aren't in this webinar. So it's my job really now to not go too deep in this, so that you're really interested in reading the full thing afterwards as well. So yeah, we're going to have some brilliant commentary on that. But if you have any further questions, please do pop them in the chat box, or feel free to reach out to me and or drop us an email. So yeah, so this looks at over 370,000 data points, this report in general. And before I ask you about your broader thoughts on AI and beauty, Zoe and Sonika, let me just kind of explain what we're looking at here. So here we see the top narratives using Pulsar's new AI based narratives tool that analyzes both media, which is kind of news, and public, which is kind of social narratives. So on the left, we can see that the media focused narratives on the commercial and technical opportunities of AI in the beauty sector, with a bit of augmented reality in there too. And on the right, we can see that public conversations are much more varied. So we can see the biggest, most consistent narrative is making beauty more accessible and affordable, which is very interesting, with tailored skincare, hair care, makeup plans, that kind of thing, given by AI beauticians. There's also the narrative of stifling creativity, which is common narrative across AI in all industries. We're also seeing that the public are discussing narratives that touch outside the beauty industry and more into beauty standards, such as AI girlfriends and objectifying women. So Zoe and Sonika, Zoe, you have an interesting take on this about, I think there's a lot of doom and gloom around AI, but you've kind of said that, this is nothing new that we're seeing in kind of historically.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I want to save that point for later. Maybe a point
We'll save that for later, don't worry.
Yeah, but I guess in terms of what we're seeing here, my overall takeout from this is that everyone is still figuring it out. Yeah, I think what is interesting, or kind of worth paying attention to, though, is how ethics and kind of what's right and wrong very quickly kind of gets drawn into the conversation when it's about AI, in terms of the public narratives on the right. AI beauty endangers authenticity, human creativity, things like that, quite big existential implications. If I were a brand kind of looking at this, and trying to have a kind of voice in the conversation on what's going on, I would be tempted to kind of let the dust settle, because some of this, it's really big stuff that we're talking about here, and some of this is really not your fight as a beauty brand. Some of this, falls at the feet of the tech people, the super smart people creating AI and all of that. But I do think that ethical question is really important, and I can definitely see a future where every single brand, whether it's beauty or whatever category you're in, every single brand, whatever you're doing, if you're doing something with AI, it becomes almost part of CSR and your social responsibility. People will wonder, are you protecting jobs? And where is your AI kind of drawing from? Are you plagiarizing creators? Things like this. So yeah, everyone's still figuring it out, but
yeah,
I think, yeah, there's kind of things to sort of start thinking about already.
Definitely.
I was just going to add to that, like, definitely agree. I think AI and the conversation is still somewhat of a novelty and a buzzword and a clickbait title, you know, and we're moving to a world where AI technology underpins, you know, so much of what we do. It's not going to be even included as, you know, part of the language at some point. So I do like look at this and think this is almost an interesting window where people actually feel like AI is almost worth talking about, because give it a couple of months, couple of years, it's just going to be so embedded into everything. It's not even going to be worth, you know, mentioning. So it's an interesting insight into maybe what people care about or what people are scared about in some way,
Yeah,
maybe.
fear, quite a lot of fear still happening, isn't there?
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's fear happening. There's fear happening in another slide, so get ready to be scared. No, I'm going to move on to our next. So I'm going to breeze through this next slide quite quickly. We've had some really cool thoughts in the chat actually that I'm going to come back to later. But yeah, I'm really enjoying everyone chatting, and please do pop your questions in the question box as well. So when we analyze beauty concept in relation to AI, we found the beauty industry to be such a huge part of that conversation. Of course, we see art and design in there as a loud, kind of rather noisy conversation as well. So this has AI generated, primarily pictures of AI generated women, anywhere from like the hyper realistic, lifelike aims to kind of heightened portraits that are unrealistic. What's clear here, before we move on, is just that the beauty industry is growing outside of its traditional bounds. AI is facilitating that by allowing people to express themselves in a new way, but it's also these AI generated images are gaining huge traction. So, for example, the hyper realistic images of Katy Perry at the Met Gala, they sparked a lot of criticism, which I'm sure Katy Perry is very used to. But anyway, before we move on, let's move on to the types of beauty that are mentioned in the AI and beauty conversation. I can see the chat is popping off. Guys, keep it coming because we're going to go over all of this at the end. Yes, so we see kind of a lot of beauty influencers on visual platforms like Instagram and Pinterest, kind of testing out these AI beauty generated things. So this is obviously a lot of mentions of IRL products as well as behaviors as well. Sonika, when we spoke, there's something really interesting, and we didn't get to finish this conversation, so I'm excited to finish it now. You said that hair care on TikTok always comes out on top. Why?
Yeah, I just like hair is such a juicy big conversation on social platforms. It's obviously so like culturally nuanced and maybe is a conversation that hasn't been in the broader beauty discourse as much historically. And then when it comes to filters and effects, the effects are just really damn good when it comes to hair. Like, and we all want to see what we look like with a fringe. We've all done it. Or bangs if you're American. Um, so yeah, I think, you know, the effects and the AI power, the difference between an AI powered effect and like a normal filter is just so big. To kind of give a positive point, I guess, the ability to actually see what a product or a new hair color looks like on you, I think does help people make better informed beauty related decisions, maybe helps them consume a little bit less, maybe just helps them spend their money a little bit more wisely. So yeah, I do think there is a positive side to some of this technology as well.
Definitely. I think it's showing as well. And forgive me if we start to feel like we're speeding up here. I want to make sure that we have time for the questions because I can see them rolling in. Because I think that leads us on to our next slide, which is about the actual applications of this. So you were mentioning about these filters being incredibly advanced. So here we see that filters and edits are actually the top application, followed by personalization. So what's clear here is that AI is creating the opportunities for people wanting affordable kind of but believable high-end solutions. So AI is helping people make decisions, which is a really interesting real world behavior. And we love to see that kind of thing here on the Pulsar team, anything where a digital trend is having a very concrete impact on the real world. So here we can see AI told me to buy it. So it's kind of like AI is actually being like your personal shopper or beauty consultant. But yeah, and of course, those beauty filters that you're talking about make a lot of things in the AI beauty conversation go viral. So yeah, this is being quite a positive conversation on TikTok and Instagram. However, elsewhere we are seeing a lot of users posting about their concerns about AI filters and beauty standards, and I can see a lot of those concerns in the chat as well. Zoe, do you have anything that you'd like to mention about the applications of AI in beauty?
Yeah, I mean, I think that personalization is, yeah, of course, quite a straightforward way that we can see AI being applied in beauty. Like Sonika said, in sort of purchase decisions and things like that. There's also kind of way more coming down the track in terms of like real time analysis of whatever data you input. Like I've been reading about sort of AI-powered wearables that can, I don't know, analyze something. I'm not really sure how it works, but essentially tell you when you need to reapply your sunscreen and like things like that. Smart mirrors that can tell you, okay, today this is the sort of yeah, beauty routine that you need to follow. So yeah, there's going to be way more coming down the track. I think this is only the start. Um, and I think at this point where it's still quite nascent and we're still in that space of kind of personalization and things like that, what will be quite difficult for brands is potentially distinction. Because, you know, I think we're all aware that most brands out there at the moment are kind of playing around with AI and seeing what they can do with it. What happens when you and all your competitors are trying to help your audience to make purchase decisions using AI? Well, suddenly people just get a bit bored of it. And again, like Sonika said, these things are going to become embedded so quickly that, there's a risk of kind of jumping on the bandwagon as well with AI and seeing it as an application as opposed to, something that still always has to be kind of human-centered and deliver against a real need. And of course, be part of the wider brand experience as well.
That's so right, and I think that the something that we did see on a chart that is in the report but isn't in this deck today that you'll get emailed is a focus on authenticity being kind of a top worry. So I think when we look at the words associated with AI and beauty, we see this rather ironic appeal for the natural. But in this chart that was about concerns, it was saying about how there was a worry about authenticity that kind of shows that almost as a measure of audiences' fear that AI doesn't actually enable society to expand their creativity or around or their beauty standards or kind of think outside the box of what beautiful can be, but rather re-establish and re-entrench traditionally held views. Which is why when we see here the natural being the top people using AI to find something natural, it's so ironic, it's so interesting. Do either of you have anything to say about the potential implications of this natural focus for both brands and for users?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you see it also in like the interiors and the whole dreamscape trend on TikTok. Like people want to see these natural situations reinterpreted using AI and CGI. I don't know whether it's just being able to like put the technology into context. I think within the beauty space, it's obviously got connotations of our previous conversation about aging and, achieving what's real and what's not. So yeah, I think I'm not sure what my point is there, but it's very, very interesting.
No, it's very interesting. You're right. It's kind of reflecting that the world back at them in that way. Interesting to think that it's across all AI as well as beauty. Yeah. Brilliant. I'll move on. Just before we go into our final slides are going to talk specifically about brands and about the kind of AI relevance in beauty there. I'm really excited for that. Before we do that, I just wanted to show you this one slide very quickly around gender. So AI replicates gender biases that are unsurprisingly overwhelmingly affecting women. We do here see a big proportion of men, though, that kind of shows that there's quite a masculinized area of AI, which isn't surprising. AI is a very masculinized area anyway, in terms of it being quite crypto bro-y to start with. It's only kind of reaching a wider, like less online, less crypto bro world only very recently. There's also a small but noticeable amount of conversation about non-binary genders as well. So this conversation here, when we looked inside it, was particularly interesting, including Reddit users posting about trying AI to try out different looks. And it makes me wonder, as a trans and non-binary person myself, about the uses of AI going forwards in either alleviating or potentially aggravating that gender dysphoria, in the same way that facial filters have already kind of made when facial filters on Snapchat first came out, they made caused quite a discourse in trans spaces around that, and around people trying on different genders, trying on different faces. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to note, about maybe to look for the future, in that kind of more smaller community. Brands, here we go. So AI is so relatively new, especially its ease of access, but beauty brands are just learning how to fit into this now. Just like apps, but apps like Facetune, they've been around for such a long time, encouraging people to change their face, and outside of the realm of reality. The highest mentioned brand is Dove, which is no stranger to challenging themes, and they recently pledged not to use any AI content in their advertising. So yeah, I just wanted to point attention to this and kind of ask Sonika, Zoe, we've all talked about the kind of importance of AI for brands, and importance of being churned out by maybe being an answer in ChatGPT. And I know that you work with brands, so I wanted to kind of hand it over to you guys to talk a little bit about how these companies are muscling their way into the kind of AI conversation, and the wider beauty conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think brands have quite a big responsibility, and I love the work that Dove has done and continues to do. I think with the context of Meta and other platforms stepping back from moderation and implementing disclosure of AI manipulated imagery, I think brands and influencers should like take it upon themselves to make sure that they are educating their audiences where they might be using AI technology, and then just be kind of, I guess, be leaders of a community of transparency on these platforms. Because my kind of context now is that we are moving into an age where we can't trust governments or platforms to make sure there's transparency when it comes to AI within social media. So really, like, brands like Dove, Sephora, like, all need to be leading the charge and inspiring all the influencers that they work with to also join their kind of community of transparency.
That's really interesting. I think in terms of there being some regulation around content and AI content, it's mostly towards aimed at harmful content, whereas and it's maybe sometimes quite difficult to prove that AI content is actively harmful, and if it is to be said that it is harmful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think all content should be like, whether it's harmful or not, like if you've used AI technology to create it, like have that disclosure in there. Why not? Like, it just helps inform. But yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And how important is it for these brands to be knowledgeable about how AI is affecting them? Because I think a lot of brands would think, I'm not being affected by AI, in the same way they might think, oh, I'm not being affected by influencers. But then, there was a brand recently, I can't remember what they're called. Hailey Bieber put one story that she was using this product, and they sold like 1.6 million units, and it's of the product. And I saw it. I saw this post on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what the product is now. But people would think, oh, Hailey Bieber means nothing to me. Influencers mean nothing to my product. About 10 years ago, they'd think, well, why do I need to pay someone to put this on TikTok? And now, is AI similar? How important is it that AI knows who your brand is?
It's a big question. Lots of ways you can come at it. I mean, there's so many different applications of AI, but maybe just to touch on one that we've not really talked about is AI powered search, and how, I guess, all the kind of data and social listening that platforms like Pulsar aggregate is just going to be more and more important to understand. Like, I think sometimes brands walk around like just looking at the comments on their Instagram and just looking at their tagged images, but you need to be going out there and really understanding what people are saying about your brand and your competitors, because that information is all going to go into search, AI powered search, which, as we've talked about, is going to then drive personalization and all these other kind of applications of AI. So yeah, just really understanding your brand in the wider kind of digital world, I think, is just more important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sorry, Zoe, I saw that. I didn't want to jump in with my next point, but
I know I was basically gonna echo what Sonika said, so don't worry.
well, I guess that brings me to my next point then, which is kind of as we move towards drawing conclusions today, before we move into the Q&A, is there a I think when we first spoke, Zoe, you were talking about keeping a light shining on the fact that it's not all. I think in the chat we've seen, I can see loads of words flying around. I can see Katie going terrible, you know, people saying things about how kind of maybe doomy and gloomy AI is. But this is the point that I tried to bring up earlier, but we wanted to save for later. But it's nothing new, and we're facing this. We face this in iterations over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the sense that I think, is it the next slide that you're talking about, maybe?
No, sorry, this is the final slide. I think maybe we were talking about
yeah, it's not showing up for me, just in case yeah, others can't see it either.
This
Just
slide.
wanted to make sure people can see every single slide that you've put together.
Oh, is the slideshow showing now for
It's
everyone?
stuck on the one with the brands.
Oh, yeah. Wait, no, this is where we're supposed to be. Just that my
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen a lot of people in the chat talking about how AI is pushing unrealistic standards of beauty. And yeah, a conversation that me and Sal had before was how, you know, tech for a while has been doing that. You know, it's a much more depressing question to ask, you know, why do we keep feeling the need to use technology to manipulate images of women to produce these unrealistic standards. But yeah, if we think back to kind of Photoshop in sort of the 2000s, and then kind of filters, AR in the 2010s, you can kind of really draw a straight line to what's going on there. And of course, yeah, I think someone wrote Photoshop on steroids. Of course, AI is much more significant in the impact and everything we've said in terms of not being able to tell necessarily if it's AI or not. So yeah, I mean, it is good news in some ways, as in we have been here, we've kind of dealt with this before. It's no surprise that actually Dove has been campaigning throughout the years, you know, along those lines as well. But yeah, it's again maybe that same point that, you know, there is a continued need from brands to kind of speak out these messages of empowerment, and to challenge these unrealistic standards wherever they come from, if that source is now AI and being driven by AI.
I think, yeah, that's really kind of an important place to conclude with, because I think it's about making sure that brands are engaging in this in a way that allows their customer base to feel like they have a healthy relationship with the brand. I think no brand wants their audience or their market to feel kind of trapped into using their product or anything like that. Like, we like to go back to the beginning. It needs to be fun, and it needs to be fun to use and fun to engage in these beautiful things, just like when you're dressing up with your peel off nail varnish. We've hit the hour, and I'm really keen to do some questions. I've got so many questions, and I know that we've gone over. So if you're keen on hearing the answer to your question, please do stick around, or anyone else's question, please stick around. And if you've put your name on your question as well, we will be able to email you. There's one question that's quite overarching, which is, could you tell us a bit more about how AI beauty is defined? So this tracks every mention in which AI is mentioned alongside beauty. So a bit of a simple answer. We can then obviously further refine it by looking at the beauty industry in particular, or isolating keywords unique to the beauty industry. And it's also worth highlighting that AI-related beauty conversations go beyond traditional beauty definitions as well. So that's why we had to then isolate those subdomains like art and design, and then very narrowly define beauty. And there was also like quite a lot of adult content in there as well that we filtered out. And there was some questions about geographic split. This is global data. In fact, let me stop sharing this because then you can see our faces. This is global. Hello. This is global data, and Pulsar has the ability to track globally as well as locally. So yes, we could break this down by locale if we wanted to. It's just we barely had enough time to fit in all our insights as it was. So yes, Pulsar can do that. This webinar did not. I can see a few. I'm trying to see any question. I'm trying to very quickly filter through these questions, knowing that people need to leave. But I think any conversations around regulations on AI usage within the beauty industry? I mean, as far as I'm aware, Zoe and Sonika, there's very little regulation around AI. There's very little regulation around the beauty industry in general. I mean, Zoe, you were talking about there being a late night beauty bar where you can go and get your injectables near your house, right? It's like you can just on the way home. So it isn't quite an unregulated industry in general. I know that in the US as well, beauty products are even less regulated. They're not regulated by the FDA. So they're not counted as medicines like they are in the EU. They are regulated in terms of ingredients, things like that. In terms of AI usage within the beauty industry, I imagine that there might be, it's probably kind of individual brands doing their own like kind of internal regulation for now. Is that something that you've seen, Sonika? You're nodding.
Yeah, to my point earlier, like platforms are stepping back from moderation and enforcing like protections for like women and children, to be honest. So if they're stepping back, I really think brands need to be stepping forward, because they will become trustworthy places when everything else is AI slop. The brands actually have a position of authority and trustworthiness. So I think it's a great action point for brands to be thinking like, what are our do's and don'ts when it comes to AI, and like how can we be a platform for the conversation?
Absolutely. And I think that the individual notice being, bit of a random, had one more question come in. So have we noticed any change in narratives in the beauty category since Trump took office? Obviously very, very recently, since we're talking about female empowerment, etc. Zoe, Sonika, have you seen any changes in the conversation?
I mean, of course, I don't do the kind of social listening and like real kind of tracking of conversation. But definitely, you know, it's unsurprising that as right-wing views have, you know, gained more visibility and all of that, that of course we see, you know, alongside that kind of more conservative views around kind of women and feminism and that kind of thing popping up as well. But yeah, of course, it's a kind of big macro kind of level event, and I think it will be something that, I mean, I personally will be really interested to see how that plays out in beauty and also in culture kind of more widely.
Absolutely. And I think that in times where geopolitical movement turns towards kind of traditionalism, gender roles kind of fall into place in that way as well. And when that occurs within gender roles, within households, within the reinforced establishment of the nuclear family and heteronormativity and heterosexuality, then from there we are likely to see maybe a change in beauty standards that looks back towards more traditionalism. I mean, I would argue, and I would be interested to keep an eye on this because it's very obviously been a short amount of time that you're describing, Caroline, but that within that window that we've even seen Ozempic take off is a really interesting indication that potentially you're right, that things might move in a way that seems in reverse.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
I think what's interesting from the point of view of brands as well is, if you're a brand that has been putting out a lot of, the message of female empowerment and like, quite a progressive stance. Now, of course, that stance takes on different meaning. It's much more kind of out there almost to, be speaking that message. At the same time, I think an interesting question to think about would be, you know, of course, female empowerment has been politicized, but are there ways to talk about empowerment that kind of escape that? Because empowerment in itself, like, doesn't have to be political necessarily. Because yeah, I can imagine that's quite a tricky kind of balance for brands to strike.
And empowerment doesn't have to be beautiful either. It can take whatever form it wants as well. There are a couple more questions in that kind of maybe more pertinent to the Pulsar side of things. So I think that because we've gone over the hour, it would be a good time to wrap things up, and then I'll email people specifically, or drop out messages to people because I can see your names on there. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Zoe and Sonika, for joining us today. And yeah, out in the ether, Di, Nikita, and Gina, thank you so much as well for your research. Yeah, and Zoe and Sonika, thank you so much for joining. And if anyone has any questions for Zoe or Sonika, please, you can send them through to me and I can pass them on. And yeah, keep an eye on your inbox for that full report because it's coming. Thanks again.